I'm Martie Hoofer, Digital Content Manager for Keep Indiana Learning. We are a part of Region 9, the Central Indiana Educational Services Corporation, and I'm happy to bring to you today Chapter 6 of Effective Universal Instruction. So here we are in Chapter 6, approximately halfway through the book, and we're going to look at action planning to address barriers to universal tier instruction. I love how this book just calls it out. There are barriers. And that's what all of chapter 5 was about, was identifying those barriers. So now that you've got them identified, what are you going to do to make forward progress? So let's take a look here at a key thought. This was very opening in the chapter. It says, the combination of goals and teamwork is essential to student performance. And I liked what that brought to the table is that teachers are not in this alone. Administrators are not in this alone. It takes teamwork. We all have to work together to help our students move forward. And these goals that it's referring to, we are all familiar with SMART goals and that they're supposed to be specific and measurable and either assignable or attainable, depends on what you look at, realistic and time related. So these are continuing to use the goal format that we're familiar with, but that needs to be in mind as we're moving in our action planning. So there are two key areas in action planning to think about as you're addressing barriers that you know exist that exist in moving forward in your tier 1 instruction. The first are class-wide interventions. I think when we often think about interventions, we just think about the small 20% of our students that may need interventions. Well, it could be more than that. So if more than 40% of your class or your grade level is below expectations, this quote from the book, the most efficient way to ensure that all students receive assistance is through the implementation of class-wide interventions. So there's no need to small scale this. If it's a 40% or more of your class, you need to address it as an entire class. And the other thing the book pointed out is that all impacted teachers should implement the intervention in a similar manner. We need to all go about this in the same way. And sometimes that's hard for teachers. I'll just admit it. Sometimes we don't want to do that. But that's what's best for our students. And it's what helps us know, it gives us better data. It just helps us know, is it the strategy or are they still not understanding? So we need to have very honest conversations and all as teachers get on the same page as we implement our class-wide interventions. There is a great checklist on page 139 or form 6.1 if you're looking online that you can use for identifying when you need class-wide interventions and how to go about implementing them. So I wanted to make sure I pointed out that form for you. And then the other thing that the authors pointed out are the need for instructional routines. And a definition here I feel like is important. It's a standardized format for teaching a particular skill so that students aren't getting lost in the how to do something. They are focused on the what they are to be learning. So a focused way of teaching things. So the book gives you a list of ideas that I'm not going to go through, but good ideas for instructional strategies that you can implement. So those instructional routines, so students are comfortable with this is what I'm doing. Now I just have to look at the content that I'm teaching. And so the authors, Gibbons, Brown, and Niebling, refer to John Hattie's work extensively in this chapter. And I'm not going to go through Hattie's work. Many of us are familiar with the effect size. And what I want to talk about is what they point out on, after they summarize his work, what they point out next, which is what teachers do not have control over. And thankfully, it's the things that don't have much impact. Things that don't impact student learning. Summer vacation, welfare policies, retention, TV, and student mobility. And lots of times teachers like to blame those things, but their effect size is really not impactful to students. So we need to take those off the table and not think about those, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, we don't control those anyway. So let's focus on what we do control, which is here. And the authors point out these 10 instructional strategies that have impact, and they have listed them from most impact on our student learning to least impact. Formative evaluations, you have heard about those over and over in this series because they matter. Those checks for understanding that you are doing along the way. I often did them on index cards that students filled out at the end of class, and then I could stand at the very end of class, often while doing hall duty, making piles. Get it, get it, get it. Oh, we need to review that. Oh, get it, get it. Oh, no, there's a point of confusion. So just those very quick things, those have a lot of impact. For me, it was done on an index card. It didn't look impactful what I was doing, but I was getting important data. So formative evaluations, so many ways you can do those using technology or not using technology, but they're critical for teachers to know what their students know and move forward. Teacher clarity is second on the list. Those examples and non-examples and guided practice, talking about this is what we're going to do today and being very clear with your students what your expectations are. That matters. Feedback. Can't say enough good things about giving feedback to students. And if you're an instructional leader, giving feedback to your staff, because you need them moving forward to help your students move forward. Positive relationships. Again, can't say enough good things about those. If kids feel safe, that's when the learning can start. Spaced practice. I feel like that's something I've not read a lot about that the authors of Effective Universal Instruction bring out, is that students need multiple exposures to new content and then feedback along the way. We cannot be a once and done. We need to keep coming back to similar concepts so that they can see. And maybe I was a language arts teacher. Maybe I show them a mentor text and we talk about theme in this text and we talk about characterization. And then another text a couple of days later, even though we may be talking about something else, we come back to characterization and theme. So just repeated spaced practice. Metacognitive strategies, organizing your thinking, thinking about your thinking. Having kids verbalize their steps, making outlines, graphic organizers. Those were game changers for my writers when I could give them a graphic organizer and help them organize their thoughts, because otherwise they're just floating around in their 12-year-old heads. Let's help them hone those in. I think graphic organizers need to be used K-12 because we all have these thoughts. Our brains are filled with so much knowledge. We take in so much new content each day. We need a way to get it organized. Vocabulary practice is important, and it's not just rote learning. You have to have processing with the word and exposure with the words and context. So important, not just a definition. Reciprocal teaching. I love this line. You know it when you can teach it. When our students can teach each other, then we know they got it. So I know as a teacher, I did not do that often enough, but what a difference it could have made with my students. And if you're thinking about random grouping, like Peter Liljehall talks about in his book, Building Thinking Classrooms, you get that going on a lot because you've just randomly put your groups together and students bring different pieces of the puzzle with them that they can then share with each other. Well, oh, I did it this way, but I did it this way. And that's learning going on, and that's powerful. Micro teaching, I personally hated this as a teacher, but when my instructional coach would record me and we would sit down later and talk about that, that's when I grew as a teacher. So never mind the fact I hated it. That's when I grew the most. So instructional coaches, you may face a whole lot of pushback about that, but know that that's when your teachers are going to grow, when you can sit down with them and have that honest dialogue about, look at the good stuff you did here that you may not even realize you're doing, but how about tweaking this over here? and maybe we'll get more good stuff out of your teaching. And finally, repeated reading. They talk a little bit about that in the book, about coming back to text that you're familiar with, because then it allows our brains to think about things. We're not trying to decipher the text, we're focusing on other things. So these are 10 instructional strategies that the authors point out can have a huge impact on your class-wide interventions. So as we are making these improvements, we need to be monitoring this. In the last video, Melissa talked about the importance of bite-sized action plans and pausing along the way to celebrate the successes. We can only do that if we're monitoring what's going on. So we need to verify that our strategies are being implemented. We need to monitor progress along the way. The reflection is critical. And then finally, we need to be willing to change. When something isn't going right, we need to modify as needed. And once again, there's a great worksheet in the book, Form 6.3, that I think you will find helpful as you go. And what you'll find on 6.3 are some reflection questions, as well as on Form 6.4, some really good reflection questions that will help guide this conversation. And so my final thought for you here as we wrap up is that although this process can be challenging to undertake, and as any change is challenging to undertake, it's essential work that must be completed if schools want to improve outcomes for all students. So thanks, Melissa, for coming in with me here at the end.
Absolutely, Martie. And I loved how you talked about feedback.
It's critical for students and for staff. We have to, as a teacher, we have to give feedback to our students, and it should be positive and asking them some questions and helping them think forward. But also it's important for our staff to get that feedback and be thinking about what can I do to move this process forward.
And then I also touched on, excuse me, Martie, I'm losing my voice.
That's all right.
Spaced practice and peer talk, and how important it is to talk and collaborate.
Yes. And I think sometimes we're so worried about students getting off track in their talking that we shut it down. What a missed opportunity. That, okay, are they going to get off track some? Yes. Hey, guess what? Teachers do it too. They're human. But if you get one good nugget out of talking with a peer, it's worth it. Let's be honest.
You nailed everything, Martie. I absolutely loved today's conversation because as a literacy person, it really combined the space practice, the peer talk and interaction, and then the intensive responsive feedback.
Yeah.
Home run.
All part of it. So I hope this session was helpful. Our next session will be on chapter 7, which is implementing those tier 1 improvements, because we have to keep moving the bus forward. So once we figure out what we need to implement, man, chapter 7 is where the rubber meets the road. So I'm very much looking forward to that section here in our series. So thank you for your time and your help today, Melissa.
Absolutely, Martie, and thank you for sharing your knowledge.
You are welcome. Have a great day.